Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, hosted by the National Network of Credit and Financial Professionals. I am here today with Eric Mann, International Group Credit Manager for Kyocera Document Solutions America Incorporated. He will be presenting on operating and capital bank covenants. A few items to get out of the way before we begin. If you have any questions during the course of the presentation, you can ask them through the questions function on your side panel. We will gather all those questions and save them for a Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you are looking for a copy of the slides to follow along today, they are available through the handouts section in your side panel. We will also be sending a copy through email after the presentation is complete. The last item is that we will have a brief survey that pops up after the webinar ends. It only takes about 30 seconds to fill out, but it gives us a lot of great information on how we can continue to make the webinars better for you. Now, Ken Frisco will give you a brief intro of our speaker.
Thank you, Sharon, and good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are. Just a little background on Eric. He's the International Group Credit Manager, as Sharon said, for Kyocera Document Solutions, and currently manages risk, reporting, and collections for the Western Hemisphere portfolios. He has over 25 years of experience in risk collection, legal and workouts, and order-to-cash management. He is a certified public accountant and a certified global management accountant. His industry experience includes aerospace and military contracting and subcontracting, consumer electronics, construction, wholesale and retail distribution, and business and industrial equipment. His professional interest focuses on the modeling of microeconomic impacts of macroeconomic changes on credit performance of customers in developed and emerging markets. Eric is also a member of the Board of Directors of the Federation of Credit. So at this point, I'd like to turn the presentation back to Eric to begin his webinar.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Ken. Thank you, Sharon. And as we stated, today's presentation is on loan covenants, the reasons you need to know them and how they impact your credit assessment. Got the controls working now. So I guess the best question is, what is a loan covenant? A loan covenant is a condition that the borrower must comply with in order to adhere to the terms in the loan agreement. So it goes without saying that it's a condicile, or it is a portion of a loan agreement, which is a larger document. This is a small part of it, but it's a part that's important for creditors to know, hence the presentation today. If the borrower does not act in accordance with covenants, then the loan can be considered in default, and the lender has a right to demand payment, usually in full. In some cases, there are covenants that can be cured. In some cases, the failure to meet the covenant is a breach of the loan agreement. We'll get into that in a little more detail later. Now, I guess one question I get asked by staff members is, why do banks add covenants to loan agreements? You figure you have a form and just sign the form and you have a loan. If you're familiar with commercial leases, that's often all you need. Well, the reasons are, and this is kind of an order of importance from a banker's perspective, and that is to maintain loan quality, to ensure that there's adequate cash flow, and that's cash flow to customers so they can pay the loan, preserve equity, a borrower with a known weakness in its capital structure, it serves as a measure to improve this weakness, and to keep an updated picture of a borrower's financial performance and condition. Much like credit managers, banks also have to periodically review their outstanding credit risks and understand where they fit into their portfolio. Now, these covenants that are common, these are all things that a borrower must do in order to be in compliance with the terms of the loan agreement and not be in what was called technical default. Probably the most important from a banker's perspective is the maintenance of their collateral. So you're going to see that hazard insurance and contents insurance, anything that the bank has as collateral, is going to be required to be insured, and in fact a binder from the insurance company, or an accord form it's sometimes called, has to be sent to the borrower naming them as an additional insured, which essentially means they get paid out if there's a loss prior to the actual purchaser of that hazard and content insurance being paid. So the borrower is required to keep insurance coverage on the plant and equipment and inventory in order to safeguard against the catastrophic loss of collateral. In many cases, especially with privately held companies, family-owned companies, there's key man life insurance. So it insures the life of an indispensable owner or manager without whom the company could not continue. The lender usually gets an assignment of the policy. So the company actually purchases a policy with them as a beneficiary, and then that beneficiary is assigned to the collateral lender, so that that acts in the case of catastrophic loss of somebody without which the business will not function well. You must also agree, if you're going to do this, to pay your taxes, fees, and licenses, because they don't want any cloud on a collateral. They don't want some party coming in and putting a lien on real estate that, for example, has been pledged as collateral. They want to make sure they have clear title if they have to foreclose. So payment of taxes where the borrower agrees to keep all these expenses up to date, as failure would result in the assets of the company being encumbered by a lien from the government, or would take precedence to one from the bank. So they just want to make sure there's nobody in the way of them having first position on the collateral, which is pledged to support the loan. Okay, let's go on to financial information. This is going to sound a little bit familiar to credit managers and credit analysts. Financial information on borrower and guarantor. Borrower agrees to submit financial statements for continuing assessment by the bank. Financial statements are usually submitted yearly, while accounts receivable can be required every month, sometimes inventory, and actually inventory agings they want to see. They want to see not only do you have the inventory, but that inventory is fairly valued on the financial statements. Minimum financial ratios. Oftentimes, borrowers are required to maintain certain levels in key financial ratios. Some examples of these, this should sound very familiar to credit professionals, and that is minimum quick and current ratios, minimum return on asset, return on equity, which are, of course, profitability ratios, minimum equity, minimum working capital, maximum debt to worth, net worth, tangible net worth, leverage ratios here, and financial information on borrower and guarantor. And these can be tweaked and assigned usually based upon pro formas that the company has provided themselves. So they're not going to sit here and say, we require a 2-to-1 current ratio on all loans. They don't really do that. What they do is they look and see what is reasonable based upon the plans of the business and that the bank is comfortable with. And then they come up with the levels that should be maintained. And of course, as I said, financial information on borrower and guarantor. If they have a guarantor, they want to make sure that periodically that all the assets aren't being transferred away from the guarantor. The guarantor is maintaining that collateral for the benefit of the bank's guarantee. Now, there's something here called compensating balances, new construction or acquisition, and also in companies that are in a cash burn phase of their development. If you're familiar, for example, pharmaceutical companies or tech startups, sometimes they burn cash, usually venture cash, but as they get later in the process, they will have bank facilities. and they just want to make sure that there's some money set aside in these cases. If you're in the hotel and hospitality industry, where you're required to periodically upgrade your property to maintain your brand or your flag, sometimes the funds for that, it's like a sinking fund for updating the hotels, freshening up the hotels, that's kept in what's called a compensating balance, or it's money set aside that you borrowed and you got to pay interest on, but you're not allowed to actually use, and the bank holds that. From a financial perspective, think of it as a boosted interest rate. It's money you're paying for borrowing, but you're not allowed to use. Now, those were all called positive loan covenants. That's an important thing. Positive means these are things you must go out and proactively do. They're things you're responsible for doing. We're also going to talk about things that the borrower must not do, and these are called negative loan covenants. This comes into account a little bit when you're talking about waivers. So there's a violation of a loan covenant, and the borrower is seeking to either cure or have that condition waived by the lender. It's usually easier to get a waiver on a loan covenant that's a positive covenant than it is to get a waiver if a borrower has breached a negative covenant. So just keep that in mind. Here are some examples. No change of management or merger without prior approval. This guarantees the continuing existence of your borrower and will impede the deterioration of financial condition due to merger with an unknown entity. In other words, they want to make sure they know who they've lent money to until they're paid back. No more loans without prior approval. They don't want the company going out and taking on excessive debt, affecting the quality of the original loan, or even having a junior creditor they may have to fight with over collateral with. And not to say they won't allow loans, but it's no loans without prior approval of the bank or the lender. No dividends, withdrawals, or limited dividends. An example of a limited dividend, for example, would be the money a pass-through entity like a partnership or a subchapter S corporation or a sole proprietorship would need to pay their taxes on the business income. So generally, you will be allowed to make those dividends or withdrawals from the capital accounts, for example, a partnership. So in situations where the net worth is being eroded by the extraction of capital in the form of dividends or stockholder withdrawals, the lender might find it necessary to restrict the amount of money that can be taken out of the company. Subchapter S corporations, it's not uncommon to limit withdrawals to the owner's tax liability, as I stated earlier. Now, here are more things that a borrower may not do: restricting or forbidding management fees paid to related parties. For the same reasons, restrictions on dividends, this is a way to bleed money out of the company and bleed assets out of the company, and those assets are backing the loan. That's the collateral for the loan. Preventing investment in capital equipment, real estate, or other businesses without separate permission. That's to make sure loan proceeds are being used as intended. In some cases, you have people who will, because they see certain business advantages, might go out and incur short-term debt, let's say on a revolving line of credit, to finance long-term capital asset purchases. And as we all know as credit professionals, that's a dangerous road to tread. Preventing investment in capital equipment or real estate is something that the banks are really, really, really concerned about. And this is something that is rarely waived, in my experience, unless it's a de minimis transaction. Preventing sale or divestiture without separate permission. Once again, we're trying to make sure, from a banker's perspective, that the loan collateral is preserved. There are also some other financial covenants that can either be negative or positive, or in some cases even out of control of the debtor. there are additional financial ratios. An example, so ones that we don't always see in normal commercial credit analysis is loan to value ratio, LTV, the debt service coverage ratio, DSCR, interest service coverage ratio, the borrowing base calculation, where a defined maximum percentage is applied against the business's eligible accounts receivable, or the inventory to determine how a line of credit may be drawn. So, as you probably know, with a revolving line of credit, you have an absolute cap on the amount that can be borrowed, but you also have what's called a borrowing base cap. And there's generally a calculation alone that explains how the borrowing base is calculated and how often that is reported to the bank. And I've worked for companies where the borrowing base had to be reported to the bank by 5 p.m. each business day. So it can, some of these covenants actually can have an overhead cost to an organization. Other things are death of an obligor or guarantor can cause a default of the loan. Once again, we talked about key man insurance. So that was a way to kind of get around this uncontrollable default. Cross default or cross collateralization. Let's say you have several different loans with a lender. So a default on one loan could create a default on all the loans. That's a cross collateralization. Cross default. Cross collateralization is, think of it as a bunch of interlocking cross corporate guarantees, where the collateral, the pool of loans could be used to satisfy the debt of any of the loans. You also have subordination of guarantor debt. Let's say there's other people ahead of you as far as the guarantee. They could be forced to sign subordinations so that the bank has first position in their asset. Now, you always ask a lender, what could possibly go wrong? Because these are the things that keep junior loan officers awake at night. Well, there could be willful violations. That's where borrowers violated a controllable affirmative or negative covenant. You know, as I said, they're controllable, uncontrollable. Death of an obligor or guarantor is not controllable generally. New Jersey sometimes, but not necessarily. If they take out excess dividends, if they're out of trust in the borrowing base, they're reporting assets that they don't really have anymore as part of their borrowing base, that's a willful violation. Failure to maintain insurance or pay taxes, failure to provide financial information timely, and taking on an approved debt. Okay, what else could possibly go wrong? Financial violation. The borrowers violated an uncontrollable affirmative negative covenant. These could be ratio violations. These could be borrowing base erosion due to what you borrowed on is now aging out and is no longer eligible as collateral. And just a decrease in profitability because it goes south on. Now, let's talk about cures. What a cure really is a cure is a means to correct a covenant violation. For example, financial information provided. It's supposed to be provided by Friday at 10. You call the bank on Monday and say, our CFO has been out sick. It's taking a little bit longer to prepare. Can we have until next Wednesday? Technically, you're in default Friday at 10, but any reasonable bank would say, okay, next Wednesday is probably okay. In some cases, that's more of a waiver, actually, but it is curing a default. Maybe a better example of a cure is it says you have 10 days if you default to make this right. And then that's a cure. Within the 10 days, you make whatever the covenant default was, you fix it. Pre-established are ones that are in the loan agreement themselves. These are the ones as a creditor you can really see and say, okay, if the guy blows this, if he submits his taxes 3 days late, it's not going to be a big deal. It's not he has 10 days to cure that. Pre-established actions specific to the borrower, the borrower can take if the situation occurs. In some cases, the borrower can, let's say, lose some money this year, and he's not supposed to lose money according to covenants. In some cases, the loan documents will say, hey, you can put additional capital into the business to make up for the loss or to make up for the shortfall in revenues or EBITDA or whatever that ratio was. So that's a cure that's written into the loan document. You know that if they don't make enough money this year, the owners of that business can put more money back in and cure that. Sometimes it's paying a loan down to a level where the ratio calculation is in compliance with the liquidity ratio. Improving asset quality. Compensating balances are sometimes set up. Correcting a violation within the cure period, for example, as I said earlier, submitting information or paying taxes or licenses. Well, those are cures that are actually in the loan docs themselves. They're set up in advance. Now you have what are called negotiated cures. As I said earlier, a waiver, that's where you provide additional time to cure and comply, or a modification where the bank actually says, hey, that's not realistic. You got 6 years left. Rather than coming us every quarter for a waiver, we'll actually modify the covenant to reflect the new reality. And you can have a combination of the two. Often when a company has a covenant violation, they don't have just one covenant violation. There can be multiple covenant violations. As we said, cure impact. Pre-established. These are once again in the loan agreement. When you cure a pre-established covenant violation, generally there's no penalty or interest rate change if the cures are successful. That's because these are foreseeable. They can be taken into account during the underwriting of the loan. And I call it underwriting / pricing because as that underwriting spectrum shifts from less risky to more risky, the price of the loan generally goes up. So if you can cover that within the underwriting you previously did, then there's no need from a bank's perspective to increase the interest rate because you now have a riskier loan. Also, you'll find that these pre-established cures usually are for unfixable factors. These are things such as profitability. If it says you have to generate $500,000 of EBITDA every year at a minimum, and you come up with $490, you just can't go out and create $10,000 more of EBITDA. It is what it is at the end of the year. So these are called unfixable. Generally, you want to pre-establish how you can cure them. Borrowers, customer filing bankruptcy, decreasing the borrowing base. So that's an example of where you were in compliance, but something, let's say you were borrowing 75 cents on the dollar, now is worthless because if it's bankrupt, it's not included in the calculation. And generally what you have to do there is you have to get the borrowing base back down. But you have a certain amount of time to do that, and that's that pre-established cure. Now, often when you have to go in, and these were the other circumstances, and you have to negotiate a waiver, I would love to say that banks often are very understanding and wonderful folks who will sit there through your darkest hours holding your hand. Unfortunately, I often see the other side of that where the banks say, hey, this is a chance to sweeten things up. In fact, I've even seen banks issue loan agreements that were almost in default from the point where they were funded, because they were counting on renegotiating the loan with a gun to the borrower's head as soon as they tripped over one of those covenants. If you have customers who deal with hard money lenders, that's an extremely common practice with them. So if you have to go and negotiate with your bank, generally there's a penalty or interest rate change. Now, as I said, that could be because the bank's a little bit, how shall we say, less than what we would refer to as ethical. Or it can be because the violations themselves were willful violations. The borrower went out and did something naughty, and the bank wants its pound of flesh for that, because the borrower may not be able to alternatively cure the defect. Maybe they don't have capital to put into the company to make up for the shortfall in EBITDA. Because they likely impact loan value. So if the bank's going to go sell this loan, or whoever's holding the loan at the time is going to sell the loan, they're going to have to take a bit of a haircut because of the change in circumstances of the customer. And because this is also a type of loan value, because they likely impact loan risk. So the bank would like to be compensated more richly on higher risk loans, and if they have a higher risk loan, they're going to want to make sure that they're more richly compensated on the change in circumstances. Now, when you cure a loan, we call it consequences. If you cure it, there's generally no penalty or interest rate change, providing it's cured within the specified term, or it's cured by an alternative action, and most importantly, that the loan is unlikely to be transferred to the workout or special assets group. Now, we'll talk about other consequences. The biggest one here is where it's not cured. Generally, penalty interest rate changes can be waived. Can be, not will be, but can be waived or may be waived. If more time to correct the defect is required, if the violation can be cured given more time, if the violation is unlikely to recur. Let's say it's a one-time hit, like your largest customer went bankrupt, and now you have to go and he's not going to put you out of business, but you got to juggle the bowling pins and then get back on track. Modifications we spoke about earlier, where time by itself, if you just let the course of time run in the business run, it's not going to cure the defect. There's material degradation of borrower's financial condition, or the risk or loan value is impaired. This happens sometimes where you have someone who's holding inventory that for one reason or another can become impaired because of a market change or a new competitor, low-cost competitor coming into the marketplace and permanently impairing the value. When these are not waived or modified, they're often transferred to the workout or special assets group. And these are the people who are determined to salvage as much of the loan value as they possibly can and limit the bank's losses. These people have generally, they may be nice, wonderful, ethical people, but they generally look at this as kind of, to use a 1970s movies cliche, Soylent Green. They're just looking to turn whatever assets they can into something they can use. Now, there are other consequences, further consequences that you might not think of right off the top with loan covenant defaults, and that's financial statements impact. We'll talk about types of technical defaults. If you're in default of a loan, generally, a loan agreement, generally what it'll say is the loan can be demanded at any time. So if you had a loan that was a long-term term loan of due over 10 years, you're in the second year of the loan, you have 1 year's worth of those payments, of that liability, sitting up in your current and the balance of it sitting down in your long-term. Well, if that loan is now due and payable, all of those liabilities for that loan now pop up in your current section, and that can put quite a hit to somebody's working capital ratios, which actually can cause defaults on other instruments because it changes the financial ratios. It can cause other loans. Remember, we talked about cross defaults, where there's a pool of different loans, and all these loans can then default. And sometimes, when the lender's workout or special assets group starts to, take the actions available to them in the loan agreement, it can actually force a borrower to seek protection from their lender in filing bankruptcy in 11, sometimes it's 7, but generally in 11. This is supposed to say cash flow. I'm sorry I missed it. My spell checker doesn't capture my stupidity all times, just when I spell something wrong. This should be cash flow and operating impacts. Bank may freeze other accounts. Be particularly difficult and traumatic for staff when they freeze the payroll account. They may foreclose the use of revolving lines of credit. If there are your suppliers out there, and these suppliers happen to have revocable lines of credit, they can be sent a notice saying this one is not available any longer. And the borrower may seek to protect collateral. Once again, the biggest way to do that is to file bankruptcy. The most available way to do that is to file bankruptcy. When it's transferred to a workout or special assets group, your loan officer or your bank manager who you've been playing golf with for 30 years, they're not necessarily going to be able to help you anymore. So the value of long-standing relationships is lost or impaired. You can't say, cut me a break, Sam. You've known each other for 30 years. The special workout group doesn't care about that. They care about liquidating the loan and minimizing their loss. And lastly, we're going to talk about action items, and these are for the credit professionals. What the credit professionals can do is to get a copy of the loan agreement. Okay? You got financial statements. You see there's, you read the note on the loans. There's some substantial loans out there. Ask for a copy of the loan agreement, or at least, at the very least, a listing of covenants, something where you can create a scorecard and assure yourself that they're not only in compliance with covenants, because the covenant default should be noted in the notes, but so you can do your pro forma analysis or your forward look on the customer and determine if they're at risk of covenant violations. Now, the good news is for publicly traded companies, covenant compliance must be shown in the notes. In addition, loan agreements are typically filed as exhibits to 10Ks, 10Qs, and I believe also 20Fs for foreign-owned corporations that trade on U.S. exchanges. These are not going to necessarily come up when you pull the 10Q or 10K. You have to go find the exhibits on Edgar. But if you have a large exposure, it's definitely worth the trouble, at least when you first set up the customer for the life of the loan. You know what the covenants are. You can save that with the customer's credit file. Now, for non-publicly traded companies, covenant compliance may be shown in the notes if you're not getting audited or reviewed financial statements. They may not show in the notes. So you ask to see the documents or disclosure of the covenants. The worst thing the customer can say to you is no, and then you'll kind of be put on notice that there may be some issues. And never agree to subordinate to a bank without a copy of the loan agreement. Just, they say it's reasonable, you should give up your collateral position. You say it's reasonable, you should let me know under what circumstances I'm giving up my position. So even if it's your practice to subordinate to a blanket lender, hold out until you have a copy so you know what you're getting yourself into and you can assess your risk properly. And I'm going to apologize to everyone at this point because this is the second time I've done this, and apparently I've done it more quickly than I did the previous time. So maybe I'll try and spin this and say we've left a lot more time available for questions and answers. And I'm going to ask Sharon to open up the floor to discussions, and we'll go through any questions that have been posed, and then we will take new questions until we run out of questions, and then the webinar will end. Sharon?
Okay, Eric, we have a question from Daniel. The question is, what is a typical cost of a waiver, and what is the typical length of waiver? The period for borrower to become compliant with covenants.
Okay, that's a couple of questions, but let's take them kind of one by one here.
Okay.
I would say there is no typical cost. I would say that it is proportional to the size of the loan. A $500,000 loan may have a $2,500 covenant fee. a $400 million loan or a $1.2 billion loan is going to have waiver fees in the millions of dollars. And also, there's no fixed percentage. It's kind of like what the market will bear. I would say that waiver fees are generally not put into loan documents, and they are not what you would typically call in the commercial world freely negotiated by both parties. The bank is going to say, if you want this waived, you will agree to this or else. So try and avoid tripping over loan covenants, because you're going to be negotiating with a party who holds all the cards. The other thing that was asked, I believe, was how long is a waiver good for? That's also freely negotiated. Typically what you see banks like to do, and this is common, and that is the waiver is due until the next measurement point. So let's say you're measuring annually. The waiver would be good until the next measurement point would be the end of the annual period. But it can be quarterly. It could be, in the case of, let's say, borrowing-based violation or a willful violation, it could be monthly. It's whatever the bank feels, A, that you need, and B, what they can get away with. And did I answer the question in full, Sharon?
Yes. I have one more question here. I can get to it. Is a clean down provision a covenant?
Okay. Let's clean down, or as is also called, a clean out period, is a stipulation of the loan, typically a revolving line of credit, where the company must pay that loan down to a predetermined level and hold it at no more than that level for a particular period of time. As an example, you see this commonly in retail, where the bulk of the money comes in, let's say, seasonally, over, let's say, for example, the Christmas season, and the bank's going to want to see you use the proceeds that you garnered from the Christmas season to pay the loan down, to prove that that you still have that strong cash flow, and then say a month later you can start going above that clean out point. I wouldn't say necessarily that is a covenant, but it operates like a covenant. That's a term of the loan. It's like saying, you say principal only, interest only, or principal and interest. That's just another feature of the loan. It's not necessarily a covenant. But I would also say that you need to know about that, because it behaves like a covenant, although not a covenant strictly as defined in the loan agreement. Okay. I see that we have 4 people who are still online. Any further questions?
I have one more question, Eric. And the question is, what is the bank's rationale for requiring one?
Requiring the covenant?
Yes.
Okay. The overriding rationale is, at the time that the bank is issuing the loan, there is a certain risk spectrum or a risk band that bank has assessed the loan is in. And for example, I'll give you an example of credit cards. Credit cards, if you're Warren Buffett, you can probably get a pretty low interest rate credit card. Okay, if you're a kid coming fresh out of school and 6 months after you graduate, you don't have a job, and you're living in the back of your van, and you want to apply for a credit card, you probably have to get a secured credit card. So they assess a risk band, and they say, okay, you fall in band 2, and the interest rate should be probably from here to here in band 2. Over the period of the loan, you may move within that band, or you may move to a bank's concern as a riskier band. So what they do is they set up covenant breakpoints where not only they reassess the risk, but in fact they can reprice the loan. Or in fact they can call the loan if required and try and liquidate the collateral to make sure that they're paid in full. And that's I think the best answer I can give you.
Okay, Eric, another question just came in from Cynthia. Her question is, will banks increase collateral with waivers?
If there's collateral, if there's additional collateral to be pledged, they will give it their best shot. Yes, banks will always seek to mitigate that increased risk that is indicated by a covenant violation, and certainly going out and grabbing more collateral is not only fair play, but from a bank's perspective, a good idea.
Okay, Eric, it looks like we do not have any more questions. I just want to let the audience know that I will provide your email when I send the PDF version of the presentation later today, and they can follow up directly with you. With that, we are going to close today's webinar. I would like to thank Eric Mann for taking the time to present to our group today, and thank all of today's attendees for taking time out of their day to join us. Thank you all again, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you, Eric.
You are welcome.
Webinar is complete.
Sorry that ran short. I actually covered everything in my notes, so that one was just, I guess the second time through it just went quicker. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.